Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Amy Climer, and today is about leading excellent, amazing virtual meetings. So we are going to get into a lot of ideas about how to lead virtual meetings, because as we all know, this is a huge need now. So most of you have already done this, but I want you to find the chat box. And in the chat box at the bottom, you'll see a little button, a blue button that says you can either change it to all panelists and attendees or all panelists. So change it to all panelists and attendees so that everybody can see your comments. And then after you've done that, I want you to, in one response in the chat box, put three things: your name, where are you at right now in the world, and where do you work or what type of work you do, just so we have a sense of who's here and all that good stuff. Oh my gosh, it's coming in so fast. I love it. Oh my gosh, it looks like we have definitely every continental US time zone represented. Bruce from California, Laura from Madison, Christy from Orlando, works in hospitality. Hi, Christy, my hometown, good to see you. Mendy from Washington State, who does training and staff development. Victoria in Indianapolis. Rita in Chicago. Oh my gosh, I'm curious. We have Phil. Hi, Phil from High Five. Hi, Daniel. Daniel Capes here from North Carolina, just down the street. And you are not a used car salesman. I know better. That is actually really funny. Definitely a lot of people here. By the way, I'm calling in from Asheville, North Carolina, which if you're not in the US and you don't know, that's on the East Coast. It's in the mountains. Really cool place. Love living here. Hi, Leon, Melody, Mary, Golder. My brother's online. Hi, Greg. Greg's out in San Francisco, stuck in his apartment, like the rest of us, I guess. All right. Wow. Okay. Super cool. All right. You all can see who's here, and welcome everyone. It's so good to be here. My sister's here as well. Hi, Karen. Liz, Deidre. All right. So we have a really good number of people here. A lot of people. It just keeps on coming. There are over 350 people on this webinar right now, and the numbers just keep climbing. To me, that says there is a huge need for online training. So I'm going to share with you just a little bit of what to expect today in the next 50 minutes or so. As I said, there's a lot of people here. I have some help here from Kelly, my assistant, who's helping me manage the chat box and the Q&A. But let me just give you a little bit of overview. I'm sure at this point, most of you have used Zoom, because if you hadn't 2 weeks ago, you are now. So you found the chat box. So I will be able to look at that on occasion, and Kelly is also helping to manage that. And there's also a Q&A box. So those are different things. The Q&A is really helpful for actual questions. And the chat box is helpful for chatting. And there'll be times like just now that I tell you, hey, go put something in the chat box. And so that's what that's for. There will be a couple times, particularly later, like definitely at the very end, but also about 3/4 of the way through, where we'll have some actual Q&A time. So you can save your questions until then, but because most likely, or there's a, not, I shouldn't say most likely, there's a chance I'll answer them before then, but there'll be some nice Q&A time, so you'll get a chance there. So I'm going to try my best in this short time with as many people as we have, both to share some information and also demonstrate some things that you can do to make your meetings and trainings, your online meetings and trainings better. So one of the things you can start with is I want you to go old school and get one of these in your hands. I want you to grab a pen or a pencil and a piece of paper so that you can take notes with in writing, so that you can just have the webinar on your screen and you're not moving back and forth on the computer from notes to the webinar. I know that when you do that, it's really easy to get distracted. So going old school with a good old-fashioned pen and paper can be nice. So go ahead and find those so that you can write and take notes, because I think that there'll be some good information on here. So we have this really unusual problem right now, that this image you see on the screen, this is a very typical boardroom today, completely empty. With this global pandemic of coronavirus, all these boardrooms are empty and millions of people have started working from home who didn't used to. So I've been working from home for about 10 years, and I guess I should tell you who the heck I am for those who don't know me. So I said before I'm Amy Climer, but the work that I do is I work with organizations. I'm a consultant, and I specifically focus on innovation. And so I work with organizations and teams, and I help them actually be more innovative. So a lot of companies want to be innovative, and I help them figure out the how and learn how to implement processes and methodologies to be more innovative in their work. And I do a lot of team development. I've been doing online meetings for a number of years, both webinars, online trainings. I facilitated team building sessions online. So I have a lot of experience in this online space. And in the last week, 2 weeks, I have gotten a lot of requests from people saying, hey, can you help us figure out how to be online and how to do these trainings well? And they're not asking for training on how to use Zoom, but how do you actually facilitate and do the people part of it well? So that's why I put together this webinar, because honestly, I've just been inundated with requests, and this is a way to answer a lot of those requests all at once. At the end of the webinar, I'll be sharing some resources for you if you want to go deeper, because of course we can only go so far in an hour, but if you want to go deeper and learn more, I'll be sharing some resources towards the end. So, but we have this really unusual problem, and now all of a sudden, Zoom has exploded, as well as all sorts of other platforms. So we're going to put a poll up right now, and I want you to take a moment, and the poll should come up on your screen. It's going to ask you a question about what's your experience with leading virtual meetings? So go ahead and take a moment. How many meetings have you led? A couple, a lot? Where are you at? Just so I can get a gauge of what kind of experience we have on the call. All right, we do have a couple people, 15 so far, who have led over 100 virtual meetings. We maybe should trade places here since you have a lot of experience, which is awesome. But it looks like a lot of people, over 100 of you, have led less than 15 virtual meetings. I'm gonna just give you about 10 more seconds or so to finish, to find that poll and vote. And PJ, yes, I see the question asking if you'll get a recording. Yeah, but after this webinar, probably won't be until tomorrow, but I will send you all an email with access to resources, this recording. So if you want to go over it again, if you don't feel like pulling out your pen and pencil and want to watch it again, that's fine as well. Rami, when I say virtual meetings, in this case, it could be meetings or trainings. So, all right, we're gonna go ahead and close the poll and share the results with you so that you can see. But it looks like most people, I'm going to share the results here. All right, you should be able to see that. If not, that's okay. But most of you have led less than 15 virtual meetings, but you have led something. So there's a few people, well, actually about 100 of you who've only been a participant, you haven't actually led one. It is definitely different to lead it than just to be in it, which if you facilitated anything, you know that's the case. And then we have a handful of people that have quite a bit of experience. So that's great. Okay, we're gonna hide that, get rid of that poll now. So here's what I've seen in my experience with virtual meetings, and you could actually translate this to any meeting, but since we're just talking about virtual meetings today, that there's definitely some of them that are just super painful, where you're sitting in them and you're just thinking, really? This is so bad. I've definitely had moments where I actually felt like physical pain, like just, oh my gosh, I wanted to get out of my seat so bad. This is what we're trying to avoid. So there's a progression. If you get a little better, then the meetings become tolerable. Okay, yeah, this is fine. This is not really impressive or anything, but it's tolerable and I'm not in any pain, physical or mental. And then as it gets a little bit better, eventually you get to meetings that are actually really You would say good meetings. Like, okay, hopefully in the last couple of weeks, you've been in some good meetings. I think the real goal with virtual meetings is to be better than in person. And I have occasionally, not very often, but I've occasionally been on meetings that we were able to do things in that virtual space that we couldn't do otherwise. So there may be a few things we talk about today that get to that level, but my hope is that by the end that you're at the very minimum able to facilitate and lead a good meeting. And if you can get to that upper level, that's amazing. If you haven't led a lot yet, it just takes time, and they'll, like any skill, you got to practice it and build it up, right? So then the question is like, well, why bother? Why should we bother really putting the time and effort into facilitating a good meeting? Just curious, like, go ahead and throw your thoughts in the chat box. Like, why do you think that leading a high quality virtual meeting is even worth your time to do? What difference does it make? Save time, productivity, more engagement, buy-in, because any meeting should be high quality. Yes, Lucinda, absolutely agree. Our time is valuable. It moves clear communication. Yes, Megan, I totally agree. Learning, collaboration, creative collaboration, demonstrates flexibility, professionalism, partnership. Yes, yes, yes. All this stuff is amazing. This may be our new reality. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Rita. Like, we're in this situation where all of a sudden we were forced to move into this online space, but I don't think we're ever going to go back to how it was 6 months ago. We're like, a lot of people now are like, wow, this working from home thing's pretty sweet. I think I'm going to see if I can continue doing it even after this pandemic has passed. Now, others of you probably can't wait to get back to the office because you want the physical connection, that physical contact, which is fine. But we are moving into this place that we're never going to go completely back from. And for one, all of a sudden, everybody's getting a crash course in how to do online meetings and how to work virtually. And I think, like, globally, our skills are just rising to a higher level, which is really cool to see. Yeah, so I don't think we're ever going to go back to that point. So when you're designing a meeting, virtual or otherwise, there's some things you want to think about. And I'm actually going to show you a model that comes out of my dissertation research, which wasn't about meetings at all, but what was about creative teams. So there's 3 elements that teams need if they want to be creative together, but we could actually expand this and say they need these 3 elements if they just want to be high performing. And I'm not going to go into a lot of depth on this, but just want to touch on this because it all relates back to how your meetings are set up. So the first is the team needs to have a clear team purpose. What are we doing? Why do we work together? Why are we even meeting? Your team needs to have strong team dynamics. They need to be able to trust each other. They need to be able to communicate well, and they need to be able to engage in some conflict, particularly conflict around ideas and concepts and around the work. Not conflict because of personality or identity or anything like that, but they want to engage in conflict that's helpful to move the work forward. And finally, your team needs to have a process that you use. So if we're talking about creativity, that needs to be a process on how to be creative. But if it's on how to process, what I found is that process drives everything. There's so many things that if you just change the process, you'll actually change these other things. If you change how you do the meeting, you'll change the team dynamics. You'll get more clear on the purpose. And so these 3 things intersect really tightly and need to be considered as you're designing the meeting. So we're gonna talk today both about design and delivery. We're gonna start off with design, and everything I'm thinking about regarding design and delivery could fall into one of these 3 categories: team purpose, team dynamics, or team creative process. And all of these are driving results, because at the end of the day, yeah, you want to get results, right? That's what you're working towards. So, all right. So the first thing you want to think about is design, and how are you designing the meeting? And this is, when I think about design, I think about everything that happens before you show up in person. So the work that you put in to, well, designing the meeting and to really crafting it and sculpting it to get the results that you're looking for. So the first is, what's the purpose? What's the purpose of your meeting? This was definitely a challenge even before our coronavirus social distancing, but why have a meeting if there's not a purpose? And I'm sure many of you have had the experience of being in a meeting and you weren't sure of the purpose. I know I have. And I think probably the meetings that are most guilty of not having a purpose are those that are automatically scheduled. So every Tuesday morning, we have a staff meeting from 9 to 10. Why? What's the purpose of this meeting? I'm not saying don't have it. I'm just saying get really clear about what that purpose is. So I want you to think, as we're moving forward, I want you to think about a specific meeting that you have coming up in the next week or two. Or if you don't have one that soon, whenever you have a meeting that you're going to be facilitating or leading. And I want you to think about what is the purpose of that meeting and get specific. So take a moment and think about that. All right. So I want you to have a clear purpose, and everything you do should in some way or another drive that purpose. But if we go back to this Venn diagram of deliberate creative teams, everything you do needs to drive the purpose, but it's also about building up team dynamics, and the process is leading those two things. Okay, I hope this is making sense. All right, so the next thing you want to think about is you want to think about connection before content. And this is a phrase I'm borrowing from my friend Chad Littlefield, who is a connection expert. And this is something I think that it's easy for us to forget, but right now in this time of social distancing, I think it's even more important. And that what I've noticed in the last couple of weeks and talking with people and seeing how they're dealing with this social distancing is that people are having really diverse experiences. And it makes sense, right? We're also having very isolated experiences. Like for me, personally, this isn't a drastic change in how I regularly work because I've been working from home for 10 years. But for other people that have never worked from home and now they have kids at home who aren't going to school, it's just like, what? And so we're having these really different experiences, and that opportunity to take some time at the beginning of the meeting or at any point and put some effort into connection with each other can be really valuable. So it could be as simple as even today, me taking some time like, hey, go into the chat box and say hi, introduce yourself. It's hard to do a lot of verbal connection right now with nearly 400 people on this call, but at least we can do something. And I'm actually noticing in the chat box that some of you know each other, or even if you don't, you're still responding to each other. And so that's one way that connection is happening. And it's difficult for us to focus on content when we're working with a group of people, if we haven't first taken some time to connect. And that's just part of humans and how we work. And certainly that varies from personality to personality, but it is important. I think a symbol of that is that even with the coronavirus going around, we've been trying to figure out, how do we shake hands? I mean, that's just a simple way that we, reach out, we shake someone's hand. We're making this connection before we get into content or conversation. And people are doing other things, they're doing the elbow, they're doing the foot. I've seen people like shake feet, they're bowing, but there's some way like, hey, I acknowledge you. I want to connect with you before we get into the content of what we're talking about. So I want to just throw up a few ideas that I've either experienced myself or heard from other people that I think are particularly relevant during this time of coronavirus. So these are the COVID-19 connection ideas. So the first, and this actually comes from my brother, Greg. Greg works for the California College of Arts in San Francisco. So they've been on social distancing, quarantining for longer than I have out here in North Carolina. But Greg said that on the first faculty call of the department, his boss was like, okay, look, we're all dealing with some craziness. Let's just forget the content of this meeting. Let's do home tours. Everyone's going to pick up the laptop and give us a tour of their office, their new home office. And he said it was just really cool. And it just, everyone was able to just relax and have fun for a little bit. And I loved that because she was recognizing, like, we had a lot going on in our minds and our brains and our hearts right now. And let's just relax. And we don't need to be productive every single moment. So home tours can be a good thing. Pet introductions. Now that we're all working from home, everybody can introduce their pet. You know, we only have a fish in our house, but that could be kind of funny. Everybody can go meet Boo. That's the name of our fish. My friend Chad talked about having meetings where everybody is invited in advance, told in advance, to bring a meaningful object to the meeting that you can hold up and share and talk about why that's meaningful to you. Question and answer. You could do all sorts of questions, image shares. Climer cards are a tool that I created where you actually could have, everybody could have a deck of these cards at their desk, and you could throw out a question, and then people have to select a card and hold it up and be like, all right, here's my card. I'm picking these rocks for blah, blah, blah. They could also do the same thing by finding an image online that they have to do a screen share, or everybody throws that image in a Google slide deck and then sharing that way. So those are some ideas, just some quick, easy ways that you can do some connection in how you design your meeting. And I see some other ideas that are getting thrown into the chat box here. Furry Friday, I love it. Yeah, feel free to throw ideas as I'm talking and sharing. And I see there's some other people in there who are using Climer cards already. Mary mentions people drawing on Post-it notes and then sharing those Post-it notes. Super cool. Zoom virtual backgrounds. I was on a call yesterday with my brother, and he threw up a background of just shelves and shelves of toilet paper, which I thought was pretty hilarious considering where we're at right now. So thinking about doing some connection. All right, let's talk about delivery. So the first thing, and this goes a little bit into design, when you're thinking about delivering a training, is what do you do before you show up? So one of the things that I do in my office is I put a Post-it note on the outside of the door. I actually now have the blinds closed, the door's locked, with this note on there that says, like, I am not available. Do not come and talk to me right now. And then when I'm done, I take that off in case other people in my house want to come and visit. My friend Pulang, who's over in South Africa, put this note on her door for her kids to see, which I thought was so awesome. She's a faculty member at the Henley Business School in Cape Town. And just like, hey, you know, you got to communicate to your kids, like, you can't talk to me until 12:30, but at 12:30, we got a play date. That's cool. We're going to hang out. So doing these kind of things to make sure that other people in your space understand, like, hey, it might just look like I'm at my computer, but I'm actually in a meeting. I see Mark's comment in the chat box. He said, my friend purchased radio on air buttons for everyone in his family. That's awesome. That's really cool. So another thing that you want to do when you're thinking about the delivery is, what are the challenges with being in this virtual environment is it's a lot harder to make eye contact and that face-to-face connection. And so one of the things that you can practice doing is looking directly at the lens when you're talking. And so that's what I'm doing now. I don't know if you've noticed that or not, but my hope is that it feels to you like I'm looking right at you. And that's how it feels to me. Like, I'm looking at you. I'm really thinking about you. I care about you. And I want you to, I want to connect with you. And so I'm looking directly at the lens. And so here's how you do this and do this well. I will say it takes a little practice to get used to it because it seems kind of awkward at first. But I'm going to show you my setup in this photo. So this is a photo of my desk. And you can see that red arrow is pointing to my camera. Now, I've been working from home for a while, so I've had this set up for a while. If you're brand new working from home, you might not be able to get this right now because it's actually quite difficult to buy a webcam at the moment. So you might be using the camera that's built into your laptop, which is okay. But what you want to do is set your camera at eye level, because you don't want it to look like you're looking down to somebody. Let me just give you a little demo here. I'm going to stop sharing my slides. And so here I am looking at the camera, but if I change my camera, and now I'm using this camera down here, it's like I'm peering over you, which I would never have a meeting where I'm like, peering over everybody that I'm talking with. That doesn't even make sense. Instead, we're all going to be either sitting or standing. And so you want to move your camera so that it's at the level that you need it to be. And that might mean putting your camera up on a cardboard box on your desk, or putting your laptop on a cardboard box and maybe getting an external keyboard, or just dealing with your keyboard up high for that little bit that you're in that meeting. So moving your camera, setting up your physical space so that you can, it can feel like you're more engaged. The people that are reading your body language can do that in a way that feels more engaging. I hope that makes sense. All right, hold on, I'm gonna share my slides again. All right. So the other thing you want to think about when you're doing delivery is you want to think about your energy. We often get energy from other people, and now in this virtual space, it's harder to do, especially if you're in a training mode. Like we've been talking more about meetings, but if you think about a virtual training, you're in a space with people, and you can hear their comments, and there's this back and forth, and you can see their body language, and you don't get that privilege in a virtual meeting. And so for me, what I do is I have to really show up a little bit bigger than I might have in the in-person space. Not in a fake way. So that's not what I'm suggesting, but really bring your energy to the meeting. One thing that I do is I have a stand-up desk. And so I'm actually standing right now. And that helps me feel more full of energy, and it helps keep my energy flowing. Yeah, I still sit down. I got a table over here off the side. I'll sit down if I need to do more quiet thinking work. But if I'm presenting or I'm in a meeting with someone, 90% of the time I'm standing, because that helps me. So think about what's going to help you show up and be all in. It might be you listen to some music before, maybe you have a favorite song that gets you pumped up. It might be doing some dancing or jumping jacks or something to get your energy. Maybe you need to read a poem, or whatever it is you need to do to show up and be more energetic. That's really important. And you don't have to do that for every single meeting you're participating in, but definitely if you're facilitating, and definitely if you're in that training mode. Julie Dimitri has a great point. She says she tries to talk with her hands by her face so that people can see you using them just like you would in person. Great tip, Julie. There's our hands actually help us build trust with each other. When we see people's hands, especially when they're open, we subconsciously, it builds trust. And Julie's a psychologist, so she knows more about that than I do, but that can be a great way to connect. The other thing, well, actually this goes to the next thing. So I'll come back to that point I was about to make. You want to spend a little time with the people you're in the meeting with, teaching them the software, even if they already know it. Now, if you have the same meeting with everyone, it's always the same people every single time, you probably only need to do this a couple times. But it could just be a 15 seconds, hey, everybody remember the mute button? Just make sure you mute yourself when you're not talking. And that's a super, super important tip that you have to tell people. They don't know it otherwise. You already saw me explain, find the chat box. We talked about the chat box versus the Q&A, and I explained that. My guess is at least half of you probably already knew that, but I don't really know. And so I'm just going to take a minute or two to explain that. You want to explain to people how to share the screen. There's something that we don't have access to it right now, because in Zoom, we're in a webinar versus a meeting. The meetings are capped at 200 people, or at least with my account. And so we had to make this a webinar. I was actually hoping to make it a meeting format. But in an actual meeting format, you have the option to do a gallery view versus a speaker view. So the speaker view is that whoever's speaking is the one, like their image fills the screen, versus gallery view is where you can see everybody. And 90% of the time when I'm in a meeting, I want the gallery view because that feels more like I'm sitting around a table talking to everybody. In fact, here's a little image of the gallery view. We had a little family Zoom meeting yesterday, and this is my sister, brother, and dad. And so this was an example of the gallery view. And it's nice because now I can see everybody's face. I can tell what's going on in the meeting. So those are some things that you can teach people and explain to them. Thanks, Deidre. Yes, Sarah, correct. You cannot do gallery view in a webinar. At least I don't think so. The only thing you would see would be me and Kelly, my assistant. Like everybody else doesn't, like automatically in a webinar format, everybody's camera is off and their mic is off. And in a webinar, at least in Zoom, now this may be different in different software, but in a Zoom webinar, participants can't share their camera or unmute themselves. Only the host can. I can unmute a participant. I don't know if I can actually share your camera, but only panelists or hosts can share their camera, I'm pretty sure. Now in a meeting, that's different. People can mute and unmute themselves, or as a host, I could mute everybody or unmute everybody. So yeah, important distinction. From what I'm seeing, if you're using Zoom, and we're not going to get too techie here, but in Zoom, like if you just buy the $15 a month package or whatever the thing is, all you have access to is meetings. So 90% of everything that's happening right now in the world is on a Zoom meeting, well, or another platform. But a webinar is like you pay a little more for it and whatnot. So, all right. Let's talk about a question that I get a lot, and that's how do you generate ideas in online meetings? So we're going to actually experiment and do this in a few minutes. But I think because I work in innovation and creativity, people ask me this, like, well, how do you brainstorm in an online situation? Because in person, what I do is I use a lot of these little guys. I use a lot of Post-it notes. And there's a number of ways you can do this in an online format, but we're going to do an experiment. This may fail miserably, I don't know. But we're going to do an experiment, and not yet, but in a moment, we are going to get into a Google Doc together. And you're going to answer this question of how might we engage participants in an online meeting? And so I know that there's nearly 400 of you here, that there's a lot of ideas in this group. And the way this will work is that where it says type your ideas below, you'll put your cursor there underneath and start typing, and everybody will be on a different line. But here's the challenge. Google Docs will only accept 100 people at a time. So I figured, if some of you want to go in there and put the doc and add some comments, and then I'll share the Google Doc live on my screen, and so everybody else can see that. So we're gonna put here's the link that you're gonna go to, climerconsulting.com. Whoops, hold on, my bad. climerconsulting.com/ideas2020. And Kelly's gonna also put that link in the chat box so you can just click on it. So if you wanna participate in this quick ideation session, you can go there and start typing in the actual list in the Google Doc. Kelly, did you put the link in? There it is. All right, sweet. I'm going to open that doc, the Google Doc. Oh yeah, it's working. Make sure you're at the bottom down there below the line. There's a bunch of people above the line. All right, we've got about 35 people in here. Hold on a second, I'll share this screen with you. There's a lot of other tools you can use. Mural is one of them. I see that in the box. One of the reasons I wanted to show this is because it's easy, it's cheap, it's free, right? It's going to work for nearly everybody, unless you work for the federal government. They don't let you use Google on a federal computer, which maybe that'll change someday. But either way, there's some other similar tool that you can use. And the nice thing about this is it's anonymous, right? In fact, there's like anonymous alligator, anonymous leopard, anonymous ferret, all these. And that's one of the nice things about the Post-it notes is that they're, you know, relatively anonymous as well. And it's an easy way to just get a lot of ideas out on paper. If I asked you to go around and share all these ideas, sometimes that's a good way to do it, but sometimes it can also just bring the energy down as we're like waiting for each person to share and to talk. And so this can be a fun way to just do it quickly. I will make sure that you all get access to this document so you get all these ideas afterwards. All right. Feel free to keep sharing ideas in there if you want. I'm going to go back to the slides. So I'm curious, from what we've talked about so far, take a moment and answer this question in the chat box. What is one change you want to make in your next online meeting? What is one change you want to make in your next online meeting? And be specific if you can. I see some of you saying engagement, interaction. Cool. What specifically are you going to do to increase that engagement or interaction? All right, I see look directly at the camera. That's good. Andrew, make it as personable as possible. Yeah, great idea, Karen. Change the camera height, having a clear agenda. All right, Bethany's gonna do pet introductions. That's awesome. Yes, using video for all participants. I didn't say that out loud, Susan. I'm glad you put that in there. I think that if you're leading a team meeting, I would just make this requirement. You have to have your video on. I mean, maybe there's a rare exception, but the expectation, maybe I shouldn't say requirement, the expectation is that you show up with your video on and you're fully engaged. And you also want to talk to people about, especially if it's a team meeting, you all are going to be working together regularly, like what is expected, and have that conversation. So it's expected that you're not checking email. It's expected that your phone is off and maybe on the other side of the room. Just get really explicit about it, because the distractions available in an online meeting space are through the roof compared to being in an in-person meeting. I guess if you have your computer in an in-person meeting, then it could be the same. But I also think that it's important, I just want to talk about this, is that a part of leading effective meetings is also being a really good meeting participant. And so if you are showing up and you're like half listening, you know, you're checking your email, you're responding to a text when somebody else in the room or in the group is talking, like, people know that, right? Like, they can see it in your eyes, they can see it in your body language, they can tell when you're not responding quite in the way they expected. They're like, what, did you actually hear the question? So thinking about how can you like model participation, because especially if you're in a leadership role, like, people will follow you and do what you do. All right, wow, awesome ideas. I'm just going back to the chat here. Okay, so Christine Harris makes this point that including a connection activity, and my team doesn't love using the camera, but maybe use an image activity. I think this is a big challenge, that there's a lot of times where team members just don't want to get it. They don't want to use the camera. They feel uncomfortable. They don't want to see themselves. And so I think one is just making it normal. It also can be really helpful to talk about how, like, there's something psychologically, like when we look at ourselves, we just, you know, we see all these flaws and blemishes. Like, I am not, that's one of the great reasons of looking at the lens. Like, I am not looking at myself right now. Hopefully there's nothing weird going on, right? But the more you see yourself on screen, the more normal it gets. And my friend in Australia, Julian Mather, he's a videographer, and he talks about that there's actually psychologically, like when we look in the mirror, we see a certain image of ourselves. But when we look on camera, we actually are seeing the reverse image that we see in a mirror, like when we look at the screen of ourselves. And so it looks weird to us because we don't look the way we expect we looked, because we're used to looking at ourselves in the mirror. And I think there's a bit more to it, but the idea is like just practicing and getting used to it. And I think if you talk about how important that is for engagement and connection, it can be really helpful. Couple other things I want to talk about based on some of the comments. I'm actually just going to stop sharing my screen for a minute so that you all can see the full bigger image if you want to do that. So a couple comments in here. One is, I just lost it. It was about getting people to talk, or not having like those awkward pauses, or like, oh, how do we know who's going to talk? So when I facilitate meetings of more than like 2, 3 people, you know, and there's a small team, say 5 or more people, if I ask the question of the group, I then call on people. Like one of my pet peeves is when there's like, you know, 10 people in the meeting, and then the facilitator asks the questions like, hey, who wants to go first? It's not a bad question in an in-person meeting because we can see each other's body language, we can raise hands or whatever, but in a virtual meeting, it just creates even more awkwardness. So don't ask that question. Don't ask who wants to go first. Just tell them, hey, I'm going to call on you to go first so we could do this in a, you know, a little bit more seamless. And then call on them, be like, oh, hey, Kelly, you're next. Joyce, okay, you're next. Megan, you're next, you know, whatever. Or you could have a slide or something like, hey, we're going in alphabetical order. Here's everybody's names, or this is the order. You know, come up with some way so people, if you're doing like a, you know, go around, everybody share, that you've done it a little bit more methodically. It's a little bit more scripted, and it just helps decrease some of that awkwardness. You can also actually, if everybody's looking in gallery view, you can just have them raise their hand, like, hey, raise your hand when you're ready, you know, and then they can unmute themselves, or you can unmute them, however it's set up. That physical raising hand, if you're in gallery view, does work pretty well. Same thing with people talking over each other. The pace of a online discussion in a virtual meeting can be a little bit different, and so just talking about that, and you know, sometimes it's fun to laugh about it. So, all right, I hope that's helpful. Just looking at some of these other things. Yeah, definitely have people unmute. You know, I think if you're just there to deliver information, just make a video. Just have people watch it in their own time. Don't have people all get together. It's annoying. Yeah, just like if it's a meeting, it should be about, you know, interaction, and there's some back and forth. And even right now, while I don't get a chance to hear you, there's some back and forth that's going on. All right. Yeah, Megan, great point. Identify by name who's expected to speak. Yeah. Yeah, and there's a number of other ways you can do this if it doesn't make sense for them to speak, to verbalize, like Jeffrey says. You can, you know, chat box is a great tool. There's a lot of other tools similar. You know, go over to a Google Doc, whatever makes sense, have a poll. I would say one of the things I would recommend is get to know the technology you're using. So, and make sure, especially if you're working with the same people over and over, that they get to know the technology. I got to say, I've been so impressed with Zoom. They have put up a ton of videos on how to use all these different aspects of their software. Like, make that a requirement. Everybody needs to spend an hour really getting to know Zoom. Honestly, 30 minutes, you can pretty much be an expert. So it's really not difficult to get really good at the technology. All right, I'm gonna go, I have a few more things to share before we wind down. Next is Q&A. So I see there's a lot of people who put some questions in the chat box, or in the question box. And I'm actually gonna have Kelly unmute herself and share these because she's been monitoring them. And Kelly, are there some questions that make sense for me to answer right now?
Yes.
By the way, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say to everyone, one of the questions that I saw a couple of times, yes, you will get a recording afterwards. I'm going to send you an email with the recording as well as some other resources, which I'm going to get into those resources in a minute. But I'm going to send everybody an email with a lot of info in there. Go ahead, Kelly.
Tara asked, do you have recommendations for facilitating conversation in a virtual group, especially if people don't initially know each other? Seems like a lot of people are initially uncomfortable to unmute themselves and jump on in.
Okay, yeah, good question. So what I would recommend is, first of all, do some sort of introduction. And you could do it kind of like I mentioned a minute ago. In fact, yesterday I facilitated a meeting with anybody who either currently or in the past had been a coaching client with me and also owned their own business. So it was a small group of people that we all jumped on a meeting together just to like share some ideas and do some work together. And none of them knew each other. So the very first thing I did was, let's do some introductions. And I had like 3 questions that I wanted each person to answer. And I called on them when it was their turn to go. Like, okay, Paula, you're up. Bess, you're up. You know, and we just went around. So then it was like, okay, now we all know each other. There's something about people getting their voice in the space early on that's going to help them share their voice later. So that would be the first thing I would do. And then the second thing, can you read the question again, Karen or Kelly?
Hold on, just.
Sorry.
That's okay. It says, do you have recommendations for facilitating conversation in a virtual group? Seems like a lot of people are initially uncomfortable to unmute themselves and jump in.
Yeah, so I think doing that. The other thing, if it's a small enough group, like for instance, the group that I was facilitating yesterday there were 5 of us, I think, or 6. And like in that situation, pretty much everybody there was used to working in an online space. So they were in a quiet space. I didn't even tell them that, but they were in a quiet space. And I think pretty much everyone was just unmuted while we were having the conversation. And that can work depending on where people are at. And then it feels a little bit more seamless, because then you can just be like, oh yeah, that's funny. Or, you could just make like a one, half sentence comment without like, oh, where's my unmute button? So that can be a tip. You can also have people like call on each other depending on the flow of the conversation, if that makes sense. So like if I'm talking, but I'm not the facilitator, and then I might say, oh, Sierra, do you want to go next? And then Sierra's like, yeah, Sierra goes. And then she passes it on to Rachel, so forth. So I think there's a number of ways you can do that. And it's like anything, like the more you do it, the more the group does it, the better and more comfortable you get. So I hope that helps, Tara. Kelly, is there another question before we move on?
Yes, there's another question. Matilde asked, do you have any tips on how to prevent people from using the chat box as a place for negative feedback?
Okay, I see this comment and you're talking about online public meetings. Whew.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think one of the things is you could just address it right from the beginning, but doing it in a way, not in a punitive way, like, oh, okay, don't use the chat box for negative comments, but maybe talking more about what the chat box is to be used for, and also like, hey, here's what we're going for as a community, and these are helpful behaviors for us as a community to embody. Obviously, you're not gonna always have that. It can also be really helpful to have somebody besides the facilitator monitoring that. And especially in the situation you're talking about, like maybe there's a situation where you might actually need to kick somebody off of the meeting. You can do that. And you could look on the Zoom site or whatever platform you're using on how to actually do that. In general, that's probably like kind of a worst case scenario, but there have been some situations that I've seen come up in the last couple of weeks where people have basically hacked meetings and done really inappropriate things. And so that can be helpful if you are in a public type meeting to know how to do that, how to keep people out. But I would say for in some ways it can be, you know, think about what sort of guidelines you might set up in an in-person meeting and how can you add those and modify them for a virtual meeting. So, all right, we're going to pause the Q&A for now and we'll come back to it in a minute. I want to share with you some resources and something that I'm particularly really excited about. So I mentioned earlier at the beginning that I have been inundated with requests from people to help them do a better job of leading virtual meetings. And so I'm put together a resource that I think will be really valuable for some of you that really are thinking, okay, how do I get to that good level or even to the better than in-person level that we mentioned at the very beginning. So I've put together an online course that's actually going to start next week, and it's specifically about how to lead engaging virtual meetings. This course, it's quick. It's just going to be a short 2-week course. It's designed for leaders, facilitators, trainers, anybody who's facilitating online meetings. There's 2 levels to it. So the first, level 1, is focused on meetings and all the facilitation aspect that go into that. And that's going to start Monday, April 6th through April 17th. And then level 2 is just a higher level. We're getting into more depth. In level 2, we'll also get into webinars. It's not just about webinars, but we'll get into how to lead high quality webinars, which is a little bit different than a meeting. Webinars / trainings. I'm using those words a little interchangeably there. So it's going to include a series of videos that you'll get over 2 weeks, but you'll have access to those videos for at least 6 months. And then there'll also be 2 group mastermind calls with me over the 2-week period. And in those calls, you'll have the opportunity to, we'll have to gauge the size, but to submit some questions, and there'll be an opportunity to get some feedback on, okay, I'm stuck, I have this meeting, here's a situation, what can I do? You'll also be able to get feedback from each other and get input from each other. And last year I had a couple of online groups that I led, and the mastermind calls were by far, I would say the favorite. Like, I definitely loved it, but the participants loved it as well. But it was also just where like this so meaningful and valuable, that conversation that happens there in those calls. So really, really cool. So if you're interested in the course, it's $147. I'm making this as economical as possible. So if you want to do either of them, it's $147, or you can do both of them for $265. So it's a little bit of a savings, whatever that math is there, 30, 40 bucks. So $294 if you were to buy them separately. The other thing that you might be interested in, if you want something more custom, is engaging with me with some one-on-one or one-to-team virtual mentoring. So I'm actually doing this with a team tomorrow. And this can be just with you, if that makes sense, or with your entire team, if your team is working on putting together a presentation together, that kind of thing. And this is basically a mentoring call with me. So direct feedback on your presentation. And this is $250 for an hour-long Zoom thing. And you can send me some things in advance that I might look at, but we'll walk through really leveling up and making that presentation awesome. So I am super excited about this because I know there's a huge need out there. So if you're interested, you can see the link down there, and Kelly just put the link in the chat box as well. So if you're interested in the program, sign up for it this week. It's going to launch on Monday. I feel like right now we're in this space, like there's a huge need to get this information and to everybody to level up really quick. So those will be there for you. We're going to throw one more poll up, the final poll of the session. So Kelly's going to put a last poll up there, just asking about what additional resources that you want. And while that poll is going, we're also going to open it up for one final Q&A. So I'm going to ask Kelly to feed me some questions. Kelly, are there any questions about the course that I just talked about, or are there questions about that just make sense based on the topic we've been talking about?
There was a question by Floor, but I think you kind of covered it throughout. But I thought it was a good question. When creativity is the main purpose of the meeting, how do you build the right environment to engage the participants to be part of that process.
When creativity is the main purpose?
Yes.
I think, I'm going to see if I can find this question so I can read it. This is from Floor.
Yes. Up at the top, probably.
Here we go. I think, Flora, this is very much like you would in any session. And so you want to really put some thought into how you design this, and designing a place where you're focusing on connection. So people are connecting first. One resource I can send to you all is my podcast called The Deliberate Creative. Here, I'll put a link in the chat box. And the first several episodes of the podcast, I really get into how creativity works and how to facilitate it. And so that may be a really good resource for you, is that you really want to think about clarifying the problem and having that be as a segment, then generating ideas, developing those ideas, implementing those ideas, and going through a process. If you go back to that Venn diagram I shared at the beginning. So sharing a whole process and making sure that the team understands what that process is. I find that that's really helpful when you're trying to increase creativity. I sometimes do webinars about that. I actually did one this morning at 6 a.m. It was for some people in Australia, although it was open to the public. That's really about building creativity. So I feel like I'm only partially answering this, because we could talk for another 3 days on this question. But I think really it's about making sure that you're setting up an environment that's engaging, that you're getting people connecting first before they're sharing content. And making sure that you've set some ground rules, that people are, they're listening, they're involved, and they're not there to criticize each other's ideas, until you get to that point. There'll be a time and place for that. But I hope that helps, Flor. All right, are there some other ideas?
There was a question. There are a few questions about internet connectivity, and Andrew asked, "How do you navigate the internet connection issues?"
Andrew, I'll be honest, that hasn't really been a big issue for me. I think it might vary depending on where you live. I will say I did something new about a year or two ago that really helped, and I got a different router, which I thought maybe it was right behind me, but it's on the other side of the room. And it's a router by Google. It's like this little round white router that made a huge difference. I was always like cursing my internet company, and then I just got a new router. I was like, oh, okay, maybe they were doing a fine job after all. Otherwise, I would say connect to a hard line, actually connect with a cord to the internet. Beyond that, I have no idea. So it's definitely not my expertise. So I hope that helps. I see some questions about microphones and headsets. So I'm going to show you my mic. This is my mic. This is my mic. It is by this company, Rode. They make some very nice microphone equipment, from my understanding. I have a couple other things, but I just use the lapel mic. It is important that I think that you don't just use your computer mic. Your computer mic is designed to pick up all the sound in the room, whereas having a mic that's just for your voice is helpful. It doesn't matter if it's a headset or not, but you want to have something that's a mic for that. One of the things we'll get into in the class is more about some of the technology and what's great, what's not. We're also going to get into more some of the advanced features in Zoom. We'll do this in the level 1 class. Zoom's a software I use, so we're not going to get into a bunch of other software, but the reality is like, it's all similar. But we'll get into that in the class for sure. All right, I think maybe we have time for one more question. Anything else in there, Kelly? I think, yeah, okay, go ahead.
There's a lot that you've already covered, or that you're going to cover in the class. What do you do about participants who do not want to use their video?
I mean, I think it depends on the situation. if it's like a team meeting that you all are going to be meeting on a regular basis, I don't know, I'd probably kind of try to figure out like, well, what's going on? Like why don't you want to use your video, or what can we do to support you? If it's just somebody who like, it's maybe a one-time meeting and they don't want to use your video, I wouldn't even think twice about it. Like that's not important. That's if for who knows what's going on for them. I would let it go. But if it's something where you're going to be meeting on a regular basis, then maybe try to figure out how to support them and how you can help them and what's going on. So, because it is, I think at the end of the day, it is a helpful tool for connection. So I see there's a bunch of other questions. So one of the things that I'll do is I'll collect all these questions, and I'm guessing most of these will be answered in the course. The course is still under development. This wasn't a need 3 weeks ago. So the course is still being developed, and I'll use these questions to develop some of the videos in the course. If you have any questions about the course, Kelly will put my email in the chat box. Feel free to email me directly. I'll send you a link to the course and everything, at least by tomorrow. So I'm really excited about this course. I think it's going to be really good, really powerful way to help you level up your skills as a facilitator in this online world, because like we said earlier, this isn't going away. This is here for good. So I hope this was helpful. I hope this gave you some tips so that you can go out and rock your online meetings. Thanks everyone. Have a great day. Bye.